I failed to come up with a clever way to communicate this, so I will just say it. You should watch my video on the 1970s Planet of the Apes run before watching this one. A lot of my analysis here is built on concepts, characters, and events from those movies. I'd hate for you to miss out on some hilarious running jokes, and you know what? It's just a good video, so please consider giving that a click before proceeding. How long am I supposed to wait? Oh, how fitting it is to be making a sequel for this channel, and how fitting it is that my first is on Planet of the Apes. I had a terrific time making my classic Planet of the Apes episode. It's when what this show is really clicked for me, and it made me a fan of a series that I otherwise probably wouldn't have even seen, so I knew I wasn't going to be able to wait too long before coming back. I have not seen the modern Planet of the Apes trilogy since shortly after release, and I don't remember a whole lot of details, but more importantly, I've not seen them since becoming intimately familiar with the films they're based on. So just as I was incredibly excited to jump into a new franchise completely blind last time, I am equally eager to see what I think of these movies, now that I have the context and expectations of their predecessors. Sorry, I'm doing it again. I'm using future tense when obviously I've already seen the movies by the time I'm filming a whole essay on them. Except twist, this time I actually am filming my intro beforehand. Or at least I would be, except after writing that, I had to watch the first one just to get things started, and I kind of just kept going because I was really enjoying them. So there's your answer. I like these movies enough to ruin my own damn joke.
I maintain my hypothesis that the drug in his system has radically boosted healthy brain functioning, and plays chess pretty well.
The very existence of Rise of the Planet of the Apes kinda confuses me. 2011 was not 1968, trust me, I did the math. Thanks to previous guest on the show, The Dark Knight, dark and gritty was a huge trend amongst blockbusters at the time, and yet bewilderingly, that's when they decided to bring this franchise back. Even more bewilderingly, they totally bent to that trend and made Planet of the Apes of all IPs realistic. And most bewildering of all is that the resulting film is good. Maybe I should say that it becomes good eventually, as much of Rise's first half is held back by its objective of providing a plausible, real-world origin for a Planet of Apes. The story follows a scientist, Will, as he creates a medicinal virus designed to heal brain cells that ends up enhancing intelligence in the process. This drug is tested on some chimps, turning them smart, and look at that, we're halfway to the madhouse already. Let's get some of my classic POTA fan griping out of the way early. This brain drug is a transparent reaction to the fear that audiences would reject the premise of this franchise unless it was properly grounded. It turns Planet of the Apes into harder sci-fi, a series concerned with giving explanations for its science fiction elements, as opposed to the original run, where in the third film, Zira and Cornelius hop into a crashed rocket ship and travel back in time by... Now this approach is the entire idea behind the reboot, and it does provide plenty of merits that I will spend plenty of time praising, but before I totally let go of my preconceptions of what kind of franchise this is, I just wanted to say that I didn't need this change in order to get into Planet of the Apes. I'm kinda cultured like that. The motivation behind Will's research, his Alzheimer's suffering father, played by the always good John Lithgow, is an emotional and effective storyline, but outside of that, Rise's early runtime is unremarkable. The problem isn't that it doesn't feel like a Planet of the Apes movie, though it doesn't, it's that it feels like tons of other movies. It's a fairly standard plot of a scientist being shut down because his money-hungry boss just doesn't get it. There's a blandly written girlfriend character, in fact most of the script is what they call mid. It's fine, but outside of Lithgow, none of the human characters are particularly interesting. In fact, they're pretty one note. Where Rise does feature greatness and Planet of the Apes-ness is in its ape, Caesar. The film opens with Caesar's mother, who they call Bright Eyes, nice one.
There's Bright Eyes.
Being captured in the jungle, and while I have a lot of respect and fondness for the ape prosthetics used in the originals, the technology behind these motion-captured apes remains a remarkable technical achievement. Unlike its sequels where these effects have been mastered, there are plenty of spots in Rise where the CGI is a little shaky, but it works the vast majority of the time, often immaculately. Will takes Caesar in after Bright Eyes is killed at his lab, and for a little while, Rise is almost a sitcom about this guy who has a chimp in his house. This kind of reminds me of Escape, just with its normal world setting and ape shenanigans, but it's not until Caesar's intelligence grows to near human levels thanks to the brain virus passed down from his mother that the film really grabs me. Caesar's gradual shift from animal to essentially person, seeing him grapple with and eventually reject how he's treated differently is a really fascinating arc. And Andy Serkis deserves a lot of praise for tackling such a unique acting challenge, more than I have the time or mind for here. The relationship between intelligence and humanity is the first Planet of the Apes theme that Rise taps into and delivers a new take on. This evolutionary transition happened during the millennia-spanning time jump of the original film, and that happened hilariously quickly in between Conquest and Battle, so it's not actually something we've seen before. The minds behind Rise did find a great story of this world worth telling, one that, I have to admit, is only possible thanks to the brain drug, the grounded approach that I initially had reservations about. Similarities to the previous POTAs increase exponentially from here, as after Caesar attacks an obnoxious neighbor he deemed a danger to Lithgow, he is sent to a primate shelter where, just like Taylor in the original, he finds himself surrounded by intellectual lessers. Oh, that's why I find Caesar so relatable. This chunk of the film allows me to touch on animal rights, a topic that I ignored in my original video. Many interpret Taylor's captivity in the first film as a human being put in the shoes of a caged animal. It's flipping the script, see? The reason I didn't go into this angle at the time is that I find other themes far more prominent and interesting, plus I don't think it tracks. Given that Taylor's intelligence, his status as a person in the abstract sense, drives the entirety of the film's drama, I don't think he can be so easily equated to an actual animal. I maintain that the script actually being flipped is a social one. It's showing how easily those seen as lesser can be victimized by religious and/or political institutions. Rise fares better in this department. The shelter owner's son, who really needs to quit as nothing good ever comes from being in a Brian Cox family business, and his cruel behavior towards the apes clearly expresses a sentiment that abusing animals is bad, and while that's hardly groundbreaking, it does go down better than the film putting a person in a cage and going, "Take a look in the mirror, man. You wouldn't want to live in a cage, would you?" And like, I guess not. Got me there? After suffering for a while in the shelter, Caesar gives up on just waiting to be brought back home and decides to live up to his namesake by taking over the place. This is an exciting plot development, and it reminds me a lot of a line from the original film where, after coming across all the caveman people, Taylor says,
"This is the best they've got around here. In 6 months we'll be running this planet."
But what I like most about this development is that Caesar doesn't misuse his intelligence as he's enacting his plans. He becomes the top dog, but he does so by earning loyalty, not destroying rivals. He even befriends the former boss who attacked him when he first arrived. And when he sneaks out of the shelter near the end of the second act, he doesn't bail on his ape comrades. He finds the now aerosol brain virus, goes back to the shelter, and makes all of them smart like him. This is great characterization. It shows us that Caesar is genuinely noble, and because of that, from here on out, I am entirely behind him. Combine this with his interesting intelligence growth arc, and while Zira remains my personal favorite, I would probably call Caesar the most compelling character of the entire franchise. The protagonist shakeups of the old films gave them a lot of variety, but when you have a protagonist this strong right out of the gate, yeah, you build the entire trilogy around them. On the subject of protagonists, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned Will in a while, and that's because he's just a temp until Caesar is ready to drive the film. Despite its goal of being grounded, thankfully Rise seemed to learn a lesson from its predecessors and does not force an unnecessary human protagonist. Ultimately, Caesar is the lead. Will has his place in the story, but that place is not at its center, so while he's no Taylor, at least he's not a Brent. Speaking of Taylor, we have now arrived at my favorite moment of the film. After Caesar upgrades his fellow apes, he kicks off their escape by standing up to the abusive keeper, who responds with,
"Take your stinking paw off me, you damn dirty ape!"
a reference that is equally fun and forced. I smiled a bit, but more rolled my eyes. What follows it, however, I am all smiles for.
No!
Using your obligatory fan service to set up an actually monumentally important moment in your film, the first time Caesar speaks, is genius. Also, this is more or less how Cornelius describes the ape's ascension beginning back in Escape.
He said no.
Except wait, that actually doesn't end up happening in Cornelius's continuity, yet he knows about it from here? So if what I'm describing, a chimpanzee named Caesar leading a bunch of apes in revolution against their human masters, is ringing a bell, yeah, the third act of Rise essentially becomes the climax of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. And god, is this a weird reboot? Half of it is acting like it's going off just the name and hasn't even heard of the other Planet of the Apes movies, while the other half is going, you know, I've always been partial to the fourth one. There are two key differences between these third acts though, and I'll start with the slightly negative one. Where Conquest, for better or worse, tied itself explicitly to the civil rights movement, Rise does not have this political fire behind it. Like most blockbusters, it does not want to be explicitly political. It is in no way about race or anything like that, so instead this fight for freedom falls more into the animal rights motif, and like I mentioned earlier, I don't find that as engaging. I do still think that this climax is awesome, and it absolutely still taps into a primal, undefined anger against injustice, but that undefined part does lead to a more thematically watered down crescendo. The second difference I kinda just said, Rise's climax is so much cooler. I do think that Conquest Revolution qualifies as cool, but Rises has twice the runtime, 10 times the budget, and nearly 4 decades of technological advances behind it. This is not a fair fight. It's a thrilling sequence that escalates to a bloody skirmish across the Golden Gate Bridge itself as the apes race to the freedom of the forests, and I was grinning the entire time. The 70s film simply could not have pulled off this scale, and I am so glad that they threw $100 million at Planet of the Apes. Rise of the Planet of the Apes pulls off quite a feat. Thanks almost entirely to Caesar, it overcomes the real-world setting that easily could have relegated it to the trash pile of other gutless modern reinventions, and it emerges as not just a quality film in its own right, but as a worthier follow-up to the original film than most of the original film's follow-ups. It also delivers a setting and, most importantly, a character that I am eager to see more of. Speaking of which, the last thing I want to talk about with Rise is the very last thing the film touches on, as in it happens during the credits, and that's, well, the end of the human race. Just really quick before we go. It turns out that the brain drug actually gives us both halves of Planet of the Apes, as in the middle of the movie, one of the ape handlers at Will's lab accidentally inhales some of it and dies as a result. The handler infects Will's troublesome neighbor before biting the dust, then at the close of the film, the neighbor walks through a busy airport, and behind the credits we see the lethal virus spread across the globe. Also, throughout the film there are background references to some astronauts who have gone missing out in space. They know we know what's gonna happen, and that's fun. But I have to point out that, just like the political neutering of Conquest's finale, this apocalypse lacks the oomph of what came before. The classic films were very deliberate with their choice of nuclear war as our end. The original film in particular was very much meant as a warning. So instead of that chilling and incredibly relevant doomsday, what do we get instead? Just some respiratory virus that jumps from animals to humans and ends up sparking a deadly global pandemic? What did they know?
Apes do not want war, but will fight if we must.
With Rise of the Planet of the Apes taking many inspirations from Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, one might assume a similar relationship between the sequels of both films, but no, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes does not just lift the third act from Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Instead, it's just a whole bloody remake. Okay, that's not entirely accurate. Dawn and Battle, while being built around nearly identical basic plot points, are very different films. The most obvious and immediate difference is in tone. Dawn is a very somber film, as is evident from the opening montage that depicts the near-complete extinction of humanity. I know I just made a COVID joke a second ago, but to be serious, this opening hits pretty hard post-2020. Dawn begins a decade after the events of the last film and the end of human civilization, just like Battle, and we find Caesar, the leader of an ape society, out in the woods of California, just like Battle. Dawn is an interesting hybrid of genres. This setting makes it, in many ways, a prehistoric movie. Caesar and his apes are hunter-gatherers with no technology that have only just established a permanent settlement. But at the same time, it's also a post-apocalypse movie, as the inciting incident of the film is the discovery that not far away there is a small but well-armed community of humans that survived the fall of man. Just like Battle. Unfortunately, these survivors are just normal people, not the swim cap wearing telepaths of the originals, made dark and gritty, and this is because director Matt Reeves is a coward. The film's human lead, Malcolm, ignores Caesar's warning to stay away and goes to the apes along with his family and a few others in the hopes of restarting a nearby dam in order to power their town. And the resulting tension between them and the apes serves as the foundation for over half the movie, so there's not a whole lot to say about most of the film's specific events. Unlike Rise, which swings through multiple premises and even switches main characters partway through, Dawn has a simple plot. Of course, just like Rise's more complicated story, this isn't inherently a bad thing. In fact, Dawn's slower pace assists a lot with the film's excellent atmosphere. The bigger contributor to this is the film's expertly crafted aesthetic and style, an area which, in hindsight, Rise was lacking in. So as Caesar and Malcolm, as well as their families, get to know each other and work together, they learn they ain't so different. Yes, just like Battle. Fortunately, Dawn's story isn't quite that simple, as this time around, one of Caesar's inner circle turns war-hungry and seeks to undermine him by attacking the humans. Okay, that is also just like Battle, but I promise it plays out in a bigger and better way here. This film's antagonist is Koba, and he is the modern trilogy's official submission to the Great Planet of the Apes Villains Hall of Fame. Koba actually debuted back in Rise as the first ape to receive the aerosol form of Will's virus. In fact, it was during that process that the simian flu outbreak began. And I personally think it's really funny that the most violently anti-human ape of the entire series seems to have no idea that he inadvertently killed pretty much all of them. That'd be like if I tripped on a jump rope back in kindergarten and that somehow accidentally burned down Fox News, or a slight majority of the current Supreme. Koba doesn't do much in Rise beyond killing the greedy CEO as revenge for being experimented on, but he is of paramount importance to Dawn. His hatred of humans feels very real and understandable, and you can tell right away that it runs way too deep for him to go along with Caesar's plans for peace.
Human work. Human work!
It's always tricky when your villain is the victim of injustice, as you risk erasing the valid motivations behind their still immoral actions by focusing too much on the latter. This reminds me a lot of the end of Conquest, where Caesar is told to maybe take it down a notch in his crusade to end slavery, but Dawn does an okay job addressing Koba's flaws before he's fully vilified. Koba only grows bolder and bolder as the film goes on, and it is so frustrating in a compelling way to watch Caesar continuously ignore or downplay this obvious powder keg right under his nose. And unlike his battle equivalent Aldo, who was little more than a bully, Koba is a proper menace. There's an exemplary instance of dramatic irony where Koba plays dumb and clowns around with some human guards in order to get close and kill them, and it is a terrifying scene. He is a Zeus or Hostline level villain for sure, and a major asset to Dawn. In fact, it is only through Koba, and to a lesser extent his antagonistic human leader counterpart Dreyfus, played by a slightly underutilized Gary Oldman, that Dawn is able to achieve its terrific theme. There's engaging enough apprehension between Caesar, Malcolm, and their underlings, and seeing them overcome their initial reservations is franchise appropriate, but Dawn goes a level deeper and a level darker than any of the previous films by confirming Governor Culp's assertion from Battle that every Caesar needs his Brutus. Koba shoots Caesar, frames the humans, and launches an all-out attack on their settlement. We get an eerie look at the people celebrating their newfound electricity and blissful ignorance, then we're thrust into a spectacular battle. By that I mean the ensuing battle at the city's gates is spectacular, and we are treated to a clash just like Battles, only made exponentially more spectacular. This set piece is incredible, and it shows once again how high this franchise's premise, really any sci-fi fantasy premise, can fly if the filmmakers ignore the absurdity and just deliver the drama at hand. The original didn't flinch as it made important real-world arguments via an orangutan, and Dawn does not care that half of this war is chimpanzees with machine guns. Those maniacs still blew up the scale even more than Rise did, and gave us Saving Primate Ryan. The one downside of this epic showdown is that it takes place at the end of the second act and nothing can top it, so it probably should have made the climax by shuffling around a couple plot points, but the good news is that the following third act is where all of the film's threads come together. If I were to sum up the theme of the Planet of the Apes franchise as a whole, which that's why I'm here, I would say that it's about the treatment of the other. How different kinds of people coexist, and how power influences that dynamic can be found in every installment somewhere. By having Caesar come around on Malcolm's crew and vice versa, the film is arguing that understandable hesitation between different kinds of people will naturally fade if, and this is the crucial part, both parties interact in good faith. Peace wasn't just achievable, it was basically achieved until those who deemed that impossible made it so. If Dreyfus hadn't started preparing for a war he saw as inevitable, if Koba hadn't gone looking for reasons to attack, everything would have been fine. On top of this is Caesar's arc itself. After being found nearly dead by Malcolm's crew, then stitched up by his wife Ellie, Caesar does finally acknowledge that he should have seen Koba as a threat, that he was blinded by the fact he's a fellow ape. This isn't just a nice little why can't we get along movie, which while I do like it, is admittedly all Battle is. Dawn is a film about how mistrusting the other is self-fulfilling, about how antagonizing people makes antagonists of them, about the dangers of tribalism, and while it's not directly political like the original film, there is no denying this assertion's clearly political inspirations and applications. This harmful divide of us versus them comes to a head in the film's climax, where, in order to keep his throne and defend the humans who survived the fighting, Caesar faces the primate who betrayed him in single combat and ends up killing him by throwing him off a high place. And oh come on, that is exactly like Battle. Guys, this is getting ridiculous. Caesar's victory against Koba provides the film with what I think is its best bit of dialogue, but it's an easy line to gloss over.
Ape, not kill. Ape, you are not Ape.
Beneath being a solid mic drop, this is the perfect distillation of what the film is doing. It's Caesar fully rejecting that line between the species. He is denying kinship to Koba based on his actions, equating personhood/apehood with morality instead of race, connecting it also to the intelligence and humanity theme I mentioned with Rise. It's such a layered sentiment. And finally, there's the film's excellent ending, where at long last, things could not be less just like Battle. Instead of Caesar's victory meaning that apes and humans can now live in harmony, Dawn's more realistic nature crashes the party. A nearby human army that Dreyfus contacted before the climax is on its way, and Caesar knows that due to Koba's preemptive strike, all apes will be seen as the enemy, that their one chance at peace is gone. It is the perfect resolution to this tragic tale, as well as a seamless cliffhanger to lead into the trilogy's finale, and gosh, you know what? Dawn of the Planet of the Apes really is... Oh, go ahead and take the shot, you trigger-happy nutjob. I'm gonna say it. It's the best Planet of the Apes movie. The original Planet of the Apes may be pure 60s sci-fi cheese, but it has not aged a day where it counts. It remains a bona fide classic that no sequel or reboot can erase, but I don't think it's just my bias as a modern viewer that's making me give Dawn a slight edge. On top of dealing with societal concerns just as important as its originators, just as masterfully, Dawn is an operatic technical marvel, one of the most measured and mature blockbusters of the millennium. I admire Dawn much more after doing this video, and I love how that's because I took a more analytical look and found it to be a great film on its own, and because I am now aware of the high conceptual bar that it aimed for and, in my opinion, surpassed. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same for its sequel, and I am begging these franchises to let me do a video where I don't think the first installment is good, the second is excellent, and the third is disappointing.
If we lose, it will be the last of our kind. It will be a planet of apes.
With no sixth classic film to draw from, War for the Planet of the Apes does the next logical thing and wraps back around to the first movie. It doesn't do this by mirroring narrative beats like Rise or Dawn, rather it just keenly looks to the original film for guidance on what kind of story this finale should be and where the world itself ought to be heading come the closing credits. And while this inspiration served the film quite well in the latter category, it led it astray in the former. War begins in the midst of war. Oh, that's why it's called that. As the human militia that Dreyfus summoned in Dawn finally finds Caesar's stronghold after years of searching, and the slogans on the soldiers' helmets give away the film's greatest strength in the very first shot. Koba's allies falling in with the humans for protection, the way the enemy apes are called Kongs, the river funerals we see after the battle. Even aside from its links to the future, which we will get to, War has some great world building. Unfortunately, just as I'm won over by those elements, the plot kicks into gear. The inciting incident of War is the death of Caesar's wife and eldest son at the hands of the film's villain, who is known only as the Colonel. And look, maybe there does exist a fresh way to tell a man seeks revenge for his murdered wife and/or family story, but if so, War does not find it. Just like Taylor's wrathful dismay at the end of Beneath, it's quite deflating to see a franchise with as endless a potential canvas as Planet of the Apes choose such an overdone trope. Also, could none of these movies' apparently required white guy characters have been played by Benedict Cumberbatch so I could continue my superb con joke? I mean, I'll do a Hunger Games callback. But that's not even that funny. As the apes strike out to find a new home and Caesar goes to hunt down the Colonel with the help of a few friends, I fortunately get to turn back to my positive thoughts as during this journey they come across two major pieces of world building via two minor characters. The first character is Bad Ape, a chimp not from Caesar's tribe that can speak anyway, and this character reveals that apes all over are becoming intelligent. I had assumed that Caesar's group was just going to breed and spread out for a few thousand years, but the simian flu infecting and enhancing apes worldwide as it ravages humans worldwide is also a logical way to get to Ape Planet. Also, Bad Ape is a fun character, even if he rarely gels with the film's tone.
Why so small?
And on top of that, he's played by Steve Zahn, who I always like to see.
Come on. There he goes off to his room to write that hit song, Alone in My Principles.
The second character of importance is a young human girl who, in contrast with Bad Ape, has lost the ability to speak. This turns out to be a symptom of a new mutation in the simian flu, one that instead of killing humans, severely stunts their overall intelligence and turns them into the caveman-like humans of the original film. Also, they end up naming this girl Nova, and simply to avoid confusing her with the Nova from the original films and for no other very niche personal interest reason, I will be calling her Nova too. Given that Dawn featured people just like us, how exactly we end up as basically animals was a question lingering over these prequels, and while I don't think it had to be addressed, I do like this answer. I especially like how, after Caesar finds him, this is revealed to be a driving force behind the Colonel and his troops. He's become a pariah of the larger human army by executing the infected rather than waiting for a cure, and he sees himself as the only thing keeping his species from sliding into evolutionary submission. This fear of becoming, as he puts it, the ape's cattle is really good character motivation, especially to viewers who are aware of our eventual fate, and it plays on a very familiar Planet of the Apes theme.
Not by killing us, but by robbing us of those things that make us human. Our speech, our higher thinking.
Here's the problem, though. This has nothing to do with Caesar, or his quest for vengeance. The Colonel killed his family because they were at war, and that's it. The film is also in no way affected by the revelation that there are other intelligent apes out there. They don't come across another ape society or anything. Bad Ape is just a lone side character who happens to confirm something that ultimately has no bearing on the story. The back half of the film follows Caesar as he tries to escape from the Colonel's base along with the rest of his tribe who weirdly happen to be captured off screen.
We came upon your herd. We got lucky.
And none of this drama connects to those ideas either. This is my biggest problem with war. It is almost exclusively waged to the benefit of the powerful at the expense of the disadvantaged. Now here's my biggest problem with War for the Planet of the Apes. That disconnect. Why this is my biggest grievance took me a while to nail down, but as I was watching this tired wife revenge story, then this somewhat tedious great ape escape story play out for a third time, I found myself asking a really important question. Why is this a Planet of the Apes movie? Caesar's arc being a bit stock is a flaw in of itself, but it also means that we aren't getting a franchise-specific story. This story could be told in any setting. In fact, it has been told in every setting. But even this isn't the heart of the problem. Even if I could get into Caesar's rage, I still think I would feel like something is amiss here because, and this is going to sound really weird phrased as a critique, but I think War for the Planet of the Apes is too character-focused. Planet of the Apes characters have of course had arcs, but I wouldn't label any of the films as character studies. The original film and Rise come the closest, but both Taylor's and Caesar's stories still feel like expressions of larger philosophical ideas rather than their film's singular subjects. I think Caesar's visions of Koba that he starts having as he becomes similarly bloodthirsty illustrate what I mean. These directly equate Caesar's internal struggle with Koba's, but Koba's obsession with revenge was just a piece of Dawn's broader thematic tapestry and argument about othering. Here, Caesar's hate has been made the focus, the be-all end-all theme, and this central element being so utterly disconnected from the world building leads to the film's ultimate sin. There is no social element to War for the Planet of the Apes. There is no dynamic between the humans and the apes worth reflecting on. They're either being exterminated or used as slave labor, and not to be an SJW, but I'd call that a pretty uncomplicated moral situation. Even the conflict between the Colonel's troops and the greater human army ends up being little more than the backdrop for Caesar's climactic breakout, and the film did not convince me that the human race is anything but screwed no matter who wins, so I guess a random avalanche just burying them all is a pretty appropriate shrug of a conclusion. I try to take films for what they are, but looking at how Dawn ends, at what the other films have touched on, or more importantly what they strangely haven't, and the film's literal name, I have to ask, why isn't War for the Planet of the Apes a war movie? Why do no humans and apes fight after the 15-minute mark? With this budget and this technology at their disposal, why didn't they finally take this franchise entirely about hostilities between peoples to its tragically natural extreme? Why am I watching another uninspired Phrygian when I could be watching an exploration of how, even in the most violent and inhuman of conflicts, we might be able to mend the societal rifts upon which the entirety of this series and the whole of history rests? I do not know. All I know is that by focusing so much on Caesar, this story isn't a great fit for this franchise. Planet of the Apes has never been about a person. It has always been about people. I guess I do know why the film has the specific restricting story that it does. I noted earlier that the original film shaped what kind of tale war tells, and now I can explain what I meant by that. Across the film, Caesar is internally waging a spiritual battle against his own demons, while externally he fights for the Colonel to let his people go, as it were, so he can deliver them to a distant, idyllic promised land. Caesar's quest in war is an intentionally biblical one. There's even some lashing and crucifixion imagery that I personally find very offensive as a follower of the one true animal Jesus. Planet of the Apes the film has a heavy fixation on organized Abrahamic religion, so making its far distant prequel a bit of a biblical epic is brilliant. I truly love this idea. As an idea, I just desperately wish that they had shaped it in a way that spoke to the wider civic interests of the series and or the implications these events will hold when they are later weaponized as part of the Apes' holy texts. If none of this sounds even remotely like the sort of thing you think about when watching a movie, congratulations, you are like most people and would probably like War for the Planet of the Apes. If you hadn't noticed, pretty much all of my major issues with War are conceptual. In terms of execution, it's on the same level as Dawn. Matt Reeves knows what he's doing. I think calling War a bad movie would be absurd. Even with all my fundamental misgivings, I would still call it a decent film that is worth watching, and since everyone else seems to enjoy it more than me, I may as well give the whole trilogy a thumbs up. I especially want to give a thumbs up to War's ending, where, in the company of his oldest friend, Caesar succumbs to his wounds after seeing his people safely delivered to their new home. For all the hubbub I made about this movie focusing too much on Caesar, in the end I am grateful that they gave this terrific character such a beautiful send-off. And as Caesar peacefully passes away beneath the golden sky, I can't help but think, wow, it's only been 4 months since I joked about them in my first Apes video, and yet NFTs are already dead too.
I hate every ape I see, from chimpanzee to chimpanzee.
Despite being a big fan of only one of these movies, overall I think the Circus Planet of the Apes trilogy is a pretty ideal modern reinvention. It makes great use of cutting-edge technology and plays well to current trends, but it also keeps one foot in the timeless elements of the property that made it worth revisiting in the first place, and you really couldn't ask for more. My only major complaint is that they were toned down politically. Otherwise, I hope that Dawn in particular is looked to as a prime example of how to update an IP in a way that is respectful of its source material without being creatively stifled by it. If you're a fan of these films but haven't checked out the classic run, I think that you should. While these movies are far sleeker and less silly than what the 70s can offer, they are, broadly speaking, faithful follow-ups, so there's a pretty good chance you'll find something to like in those delightful pieces of retro sci-fi as well. Plus, if you're like me, your enjoyment of this trilogy will only be enhanced by watching the old films, which is good incentive as well. I would say that you should at least watch my episode on them, but I know that you already have because I asked so nicely earlier. And with that, I have covered both Planet of the Apes series, so alas, our journey through the madhouse has reached its end. I'm so glad that I became fixated on doing this out of all my options, as I've had a truly terrific time being entertained and engaged by all 8 films that this unique world has to offer. And while I am sad to be leaving it behind, I also feel... sorry, I can't shake the feeling that I missed something. I'm sure it's nothing.